Imagine this scene. It's still dark, fine and icy rain falling in the heart of the city. An 8-year-old boy, wrapped in a soaked piece of cloth, sleeps curled up right at the entrance of a luxurious bank. His name is Lucas. He has no home, no family, only a grimy charm, a tattered letter, and a special coin clenched in his small hands. On the other side of the glass stands a man in an expensive suit, impatience in his eyes. Rodrigo, the owner of the bank, a millionaire used to getting his way. He only wants to get inside, but is annoyed to find Lucas blocking his path. Getting ready to shoo the boy away, he suddenly notices something glinting on the ground. The coin slips from Lucas's hand, and when Rodrigo takes a closer look, he's jolted. That coin, he recognizes it instantly. It belonged to his son, lost years ago before a tragedy changed everything. What connection could there be between this street boy and Rodrigo's most painful memory? What will Rodrigo do now? Will he turn his back? Or is this child about to change everything? Stay with me and see how a simple encounter can transform destinies in ways no one could ever imagine. The rain sounded like a constant weight on that dark downtown street. Hard to believe this was the doorstep of one of the most beautiful, richest buildings in the city. Everyone hurried past, shoulders hunched, dodging puddles and crowding under umbrellas. It was 7 a.m., rush hour, but no one looked at what was right there at the bank's entrance. Lying barely a breath from the revolving door, wrapped in a ragged cloth so small it barely covered half his body, Lucas tried not to shiver so much. The cloth was already soaked, stuck to his skin, filthy with mud and city grime. He was only 8. His eyes, when open, were huge and tired. Even with them closed, you could tell he was wrestling with the cold and sadness, trying to sleep, a restless, broken sleep, the kind you have when you're ready to jump awake at any sound. His face bore marks. Not just the dirt from nights on the street, but a line of worry, a deep sadness, something in a child who's seen what they shouldn't. Now and then, a horn would blare nearby and Lucas would curl his legs tighter to his chest, as if he could hide from the world like that. There was a small hope tucked away inside him, silent, just in how he hid one fist under his body, clutching something close. No one noticed. Grown-ups in polished shoes didn't even slow down as they walked past. But Lucas watched everything from down there. He saw hurried legs, school kids across the street in their uniforms, heading to class, and felt a bitter pain, a longing for something he could almost no longer remember. His stomach growled quietly, but the urge to cry was stronger. Only there were no more tears. It was as if he'd already run dry. Every night, each rumble of thunder made Lucas squeeze his hand even tighter. Inside it, clutched hard, was an old, grimy coin, not like the others. It was smooth, with a shine that never faded, even after so long in dirty hands. Whenever he felt especially alone, Lucas would open his hand just a little and look at the coin. Tucked alongside it was his other treasure, a folded-up, crumpled piece of paper, letters almost faded away by sweat and damp. His mother's letter. She had given him those two things, the coin and the letter, just before she left. "Keep these safe and never lose them, my son. They'll protect you." Lucas didn't really understand how, but he obeyed every word. In the worst moments, when the fear was real, he thought of his mother. The longing burned, tightened his chest, but the memory pushed him forward, even when it all seemed impossible. The night had been long. He tried sleeping in a corner under an awning, but some older boys came and pushed him away, saying that spot was theirs. So he walked until he found the bank, which seemed safer, too little light, no one around at that hour. He sat, pulled himself in tight, hugged his knees, and thought maybe tomorrow things might change. Deep down, he knew they wouldn't, but he didn't give up. The street stank. Gasoline, wet garbage, cigarette smoke mixed with the expensive perfume of people rushing by. The cloth clung to his belly. When a cold wind blew a piece of paper up into his face, it startled Lucas. He caught his breath, then laid still again. Every minute or so, he'd look around, eyes wide open, always learning how to protect himself. That was his life. He almost managed to nap for real, until a black car stopped right in front. He didn't have time to think, just to pull the cloth tighter over his face. He heard the car door slam and muffled voices, distant. Still, no one noticed him. He opened his hand again, just a little, just to feel the coin. He didn't know where the coin had come from or what it was really worth, but Lucas knew he needed to look after it, just like his mother said. The rain grew heavier. Big drops hit the ground, and now and then one would splash his cheek, icy. The smell of fresh bread drifted in from a nearby bakery, stirring up a different kind of pain, a hunger mixed with hope and sadness. He remembered when he and his mom had a tiny room, when now and again she'd be able to buy a little bread for them to share. Now, only the memory and that coin were left. Lucas's face, in those early hours, was more gentle than sad. If you really looked, you'd see a child trying to be brave, every muscle stiff from fear, but there was a weary courage in his eyes. He kept asking himself when someone would finally see him. There was no anger, no shame. It was the kind of pain that turns into habit. With the city waking up, things grew noisier. A stray dog rummaged through garbage nearby. A young woman paused under the awning to check her phone, then left without seeing the boy. A bank security guard walked by in the distance, shook his head, and kept moving. The cold settled deep into Lucas's bones. He stayed still, feeling only his own breath and the pounding of his heart. Between the end of night and the start of day, there was just silence and the sound of rain falling, and the image of a boy clutching the last piece of his world in both hands. The day's still dark, that in-between time when the city looks like a ghost town, with only the cold streetlights shining on wet pavement. There's fog, that low white haze, blurring everything. Cars creep by, horns muffle behind closed windows. The air is heavy with cold and the smell of rain. Not a scrap of warmth anywhere. Rodrigo arrives like a storm. His driver barely stops the car before he slams the door. Dark suit, expensive watch, grim face, deep worry lines etched across his brow. He's not here to look at the sky or listen to the city sounds. He's thinking only about the clock, about running late, about the phone buzzing in his pocket. He steps out, grumbling, not caring about the cold wind biting his face. With every stride, he throws impatient glances at the sidewalk. His tie is crooked from fidgeting. The streets all puddles and scattered litter. Rodrigo sees only obstacles. His hurry feels too big for the morning itself. Then suddenly he stops. His polished shoes nearly slip as he almost bumps into a heap of dirty rags right at his bank's door. He's startled, body jerking forward. His expression is frosty, full of annoyance, as if every second spent there was a crime. Lucas is curled up, nearly invisible in so many layers of torn and filthy clothes. His matted hair covers half his forehead. The face, there's no color at all, just the look of someone who's cried so much no more tears will come. His chin quivers from cold. One hand grips something hidden between his fingers, as grimy as the rest. Rodrigo glances up at the bank's neon sign, then back down at the boy. They couldn't be more different. One, immaculate, wanting to keep all problems at arm's length. The other, a small body just trying to find warmth where there's nothing. For a moment, Rodrigo just watches, brow furrowed. There's no pity in Rodrigo's eyes. Just pure irritation, as if Lucas were another stain to be wiped away. He can't fathom how this was allowed to happen right at his door, on the very day things were already going wrong. He makes the automatic gesture of shooing someone away, waves his hand, sighs deeply, almost mutters a curse. The silence in those seconds is thick. You can hear only the tap of raindrops from the awning to the ground, and alongside, air that's far too cold for a child to sleep outside. The security guard looks on from behind the glass, waiting for a signal. Rodrigo bends a bit, as if to talk to the boy. But he hesitates. The harsh smell, a mix of lingering rain, street, and neglect, makes him step back. He pokes the boy's arm with his shoe, not gently. Lucas stirs, peeks one scared eye open, wipes his face, tries to shield himself from the giant of a man looming over him. He pulls his knees in tighter, tugging the cloth higher around his chest. Rodrigo's face hardens even more. He's nearly exploding. He speaks, quiet but angry. Get out of here, boy. You're in the way. There's no room for argument in his tone. Lucas just shakes his head. He holds tight to whatever it is in his fist and says nothing, keeps his gaze fixed on the ground, as if he hadn't really heard. Behind the glass, an employee watches, unsure if he should call for help. The fog thickens. Only Lucas's face is caught in a yellow pool of light, a stark contrast, a lonely, dirty child against all that glass and marble. Rodrigo feels a pang in his chest but doesn't let it show. Not one flicker of doubt crosses his face. He's too angry to let any feeling slip through. All he wants is to get inside, drink hot coffee in the meeting room, and pretend this scene never happened. But Lucas doesn't budge. He doesn't get up, beg, or say a word. He just hangs on to that tiny something with such fear, as if the whole world he needs to protect is wrapped up in it. His eyes, though tired, have a stubborn gleam. Rodrigo sees it, even if he won't admit it, that strange shine in someone who's fought too long for a life so short. Time seems to freeze. The tension is thick. Rodrigo thinks about shouting, but glances sideways to see if anyone's watching. Deep down, Some long-buried memory tugs at him, a thing he tries to ignore. But before he can push it aside, he grabs his phone, typing angrily to the security guard. "Get that boy out of the doorway right now." The cold grows sharper. Lucas hugs a crumpled piece of paper close to his chest, watching him guard it as if it were treasure. It's the way of someone who's lost everything except hope. Rodrigo doesn't quite notice what it is, but he knows this scene will stick in his mind. Cars keep passing, indifferent, throwing up sprays on the sidewalk. A dog barks in the distance, sitting in a car, and Rodrigo's driver glances over uncomfortably. It's just another morning in the big city, but for Lucas and Rodrigo, everything feels heavier. Rodrigo takes a deep breath, almost angry at himself for feeling anything. After all, this was no place for a child. No place for sad memories. Even as he tries to act like always, something about the curled-up boy squeezes his heart for a second before he stuffs it down again. He straightens his tie, heads to the door, and waits, annoyed, as the security guard approaches. His look says it all. No matter how tall the towers, no one wants poverty here. He's got no time, no patience, but for some reason, he can't look away. The bank's doors were still cold from the night's rain. Rodrigo stared at the bundled kid on the doorstep, breathing slowly, chin trembling. Rodrigo's suit seemed to cut through the wind, elegant, dry, expensive. But the boy looked like part of the sidewalk, his feet curled up, hair matted, only a tattered scrap covering his legs. He didn't even have the nerve to beg. He just wanted to disappear, holding on with all his might to something in his hand, even as he slept. Rodrigo let out a long sigh. He felt cold to the bone, but it wasn't from the weather. He was irritated to his core. How could a bank this size, with 24-hour security, let a thing like this happen? He could already picture the headline in his mind. Bank owner kicks child from branch doorway. He scowled on purpose, his eye bags deepening. He raised his voice, called the guards. The first came quickly, black raincoat dripping, grim face set for trouble. "Has anyone seen this?" Rodrigo asked, pointing to the boy asleep. The guard looked at Lucas the way you might look at discarded trash. The other just shrugged. No one answered. "Can we please get him away from the door?" Rodrigo didn't wait for a reply. He was already moving to walk around, but the revolving door wouldn't turn, the boy's weight making everything slow, nearly stuck. The security guard hesitated, awkward. He stepped over to Lucas, shook him gently, tried to wake him. The boy didn't wake at first. He just shivered, slowly, his hand tightening around something at his chest, as though it were fear, or hope, or memory. Rodrigo fidgeted impatiently. He could hear his own breathing echoing in the bank's empty lobby. Outside was only bus noise, blaring horns, and thick drizzle against the glass, but inside everything was muted, a heavy tension. Lucas opened his eyes slowly, everything a blur. He could only see the guard's boot, a hairy, annoyed face, then the cold gaze of a man in a tie. The sense of danger hit him instantly. He shrank further, knees to his chest. He said nothing. He clutched a dirty amulet strung around his neck, hands dark with grime. In his other hand, a weathered coin, nearly fused to his little palm from being clenched so long. The security guard said softly, "Come on, up you get. You can't stay here, kid." Lucas didn't react. His fear had a different shape. It wasn't fear of cruel people. It was the fear of never having anywhere to sleep again. Fear of losing the last scraps that were his. That wrinkled letter in his pocket, the filthy amulet string, and that coin, all tangled in the small palm. Rodrigo watched from a distance, almost detached. But he couldn't take his eyes off the coin, which caught the dawn light with a strange flash. Only then did he realize it wasn't just any coin. But it was just a suspicion, so he brushed the thought aside, making himself stay rigid, serious, professional. He couldn't get emotional here, not in this place, not at this hour. The glass door creaked again, forcing the boy to shift. Lucas looked Rodrigo straight in the eye for a second. Only a second, too swift to become a memory, but long enough to bring a powerful discomfort. Lucas's eyes were empty and intense at once, full of unspoken questions, ready to fight or run. Even arrogant Rodrigo could feel the weight of that look. It was as if the boy was saying, wordlessly, "I won't let go of anything. I won't leave. I have nowhere else to go." That flicker was pure silence. Not even the security guard spoke. Rodrigo swallowed hard. His mind ticked over headlines, his missing son, the scent of rain sneaking under his expensive coat. He wanted to deal with this fast, minus any feelings, just another problem in a grown-up's crowded schedule. Eyes fixed on the thing Lucas clutched, Rodrigo was irritated again. He yelled, inside, the kind of shout that never comes out, stuck in your gut. He reached his hand out, demanding, "What VE you got there? Show me what that is, boy." But Lucas pressed the coin harder to his skin, almost grinding the old disc into his thin chest. Cold sweat ran down his dirty face. He didn't answer, didn't cry, didn't beg. He just trembled, watching anyone who came near like a wild animal in a corner. And even without words, Rodrigo understood nobody was going to get anything through threats. It was a real standoff. Rodrigo knew the boy was dirty, a danger, a nuisance. But the kid's stubbornness, the handmade way he defended what mattered. It felt like a distant echo of something much bigger than hunger or cold. Outside, the city kept moving. Cars racing, people with no time, not looking. But inside that lobby, minutes dragged. Footsteps echoed softly on marble, the guard's tense breathing, the drizzle building up to real rain. The guard tried to gently pull Lucas up by the arm, but the boy resisted, more than you'd think possible for a body that small. The amulet fell crooked, his rag almost slipping off his shoulder, and the coin grew tighter in his grip. Rodrigo watched all this, trying not to show any emotion. But deep down he felt it. He remembered losing things, remembered cold nights, even if they weren't his. He remembered childhood sins, a lost toy, a promise never kept. Though he'd never admit it, Rodrigo wondered. He wanted to know where that coin had come from. Wanted to know how a kid like this could be here, guarding an object as if it were gold, the last sliver of love in the world. The boy looked at him again, more firmly. The silence was a mute battle. Rodrigo wanted to explode, but didn't have the strength. He kept his brow furrowed, foot tapping impatiently. He decided, maybe out of exhaustion, maybe curiosity, that he wasn't leaving without understanding what this was. The standoff lasted nearly 2 minutes. The bank slowly waking up, lights flickering on, the faint scent of coffee drifting from the staff room. And there, right at the entrance, the chill of two utterly different worlds mingled, the boy who wouldn't let go, and the tycoon who didn't know what he felt, just that he felt something, and that was enough to make it all strange. Rodrigo's wristwatch beeped. But in that second, no one could move. The burly guard approached fast, not even looking the boy in the eye. He grabbed Lucas by the arm, in that grown-up way, head in the clock instead of the terrified boy huddled below. Lucas tried to resist, clenching the filthy amulet and the coin so tightly his fingers went white. But he didn't have the strength or voice to protest. Just fear, stuck in his stomach. In the struggle, his grip slipped. The coin skidded slick with the sweat of his skinny fingers, made a soft sound tapping on the chilly ground. You could hear it. Ting. For half a second, everyone froze. At first, Rodrigo didn't care. Just another street scene. A child, dirt, trouble. But the sound the coin made on the hard floor was different. It echoed weirdly in that quiet morning, which somehow felt even colder now. The coin spun, wobbled, slowly, stopping just by his foot. Maybe out of habit, maybe out of boredom, Rodrigo stooped to pick it up. His expensive shoes pressed into the dirt. He picked up the coin still warm from the boy's hand, and then he froze. He spent a few seconds staring at it like it couldn't be real. The whole world went silent. The entire bank, noisy with rushing footsteps and people waiting outside, disappeared. Rodrigo saw only the coin. The metal was old, worn down, the design almost gone, but you could still read the engraving. For us, always. 2017. His eyes widened, jaw clenched, his breath hitching for a moment. This coin was half of a pair, Rodrigo remembered as if it were yesterday. It was a gift for his son, years ago. The last thing the boy played with before the accident. Nobody found the coin after that day. It was a symbol, a little secret between father and son. Rodrigo's heart seared, his stomach knotted. Suddenly his hands shook. But Rodrigo did everything to hide it. The rest of him stayed still, but the coin weighed more than he could admit. So small, but it seemed to hold all his past, the emptiness, the hole that never healed. He stared at Lucas, who watched nervously from the corner of his eye, ready to run if anyone tried to take his letter or amulet. The boy's eyes were huge, two dark windows full of hunger and fear, but also the wariness of someone the world's already beaten. Lucas said nothing. He was a cornered animal. Rodrigo couldn't look away from coin or boy. Outside, the noise carried on. Car horns, rain, hurried footsteps. But between the man in the suit and the huddled boy, time went still. He remembered his son, his laugh, the feel of that little hand closing around the coin just like Lucas had. The last hug, the messy bedroom, the silence in the hospital after. That loss that's invisible to everyone, but never really goes. And now, the lost coin coming back into his hand, in the strangest, most impossible way. Inside, Rodrigo felt anger and fear. How did this child have it? He must have stolen it, Rodrigo thought. But how could the coin have traveled all this way, through so many years? Was this cruel coincidence, or some absurd trick of fate? So much, so long, and now it was there before him, on wet concrete, reeking of the street, delivered by a boy who seemed to have come from nowhere. The security guard looked at Rodrigo, waiting for orders. Two bank employees whispered, puzzled by the delay, then hurried back to their glass desks. To them it was just another day, but for Rodrigo everything felt off. He was lost inside himself, in his actions and words. The boy stretched his hand out, slow, wanting his coin back. Rodrigo hesitated, cold sweat pricking his skin. His hand covered the coin. He looked hard at Lucas, and something had changed. It wasn't just irritation or haste anymore. It was a weird mix of longing, pain, and fear of getting hurt again. Lucas edged backward, eyes fixed on Rodrigo's wrist, bracing for yelling, hitting, being thrown out. His shoulders scrunched up, as if he wanted to fold inside his own clothes. But he didn't cry. He just set his jaw, clutched his letter and amulet with all his strength, as if they were a shield. Right then, Rodrigo wanted to ask everything, where he'd gotten it, from whom, why. But no words would come. The knot in his throat wouldn't let them. He thought about the child he'd lost, thought about the one here before him. For a moment, nothing made sense. The silence weighed more than all the car horns outside. Rodrigo closed his fingers over the coin, stepped back, as eyes fell on him. No one there understood why such a powerful man seemed so rattled, over a street kid and a simple trinket. In the revolving door, rain through strange lights. A cold wind snaked in, wetting Lucas's shoes. He shivered. Rodrigo noticed, but said nothing. He just watched the huddled boy, so visibly spent, hiding from the world, except not from him, not right now. Between the bank's luxury and the boy's exposed poverty, there was a chasm, but it no longer seemed so wide. Everything Rodrigo thought he knew about control and power and order felt so small faced with the coin, with this story no one had ever told. He held the coin like a man who'd found a lost piece of his own soul. But it wasn't whole anymore. Neither was he, nor the boy before him. Time, which always moved too fast, now crawled. And even without knowing what to do, Rodrigo felt, deep down, that he'd spent his life searching for answers. Now one of them was here, staring back at him with fear, hunger, and courage all at once. The city didn't stop. But in that moment, Rodrigo and Lucas weren't just the banker and the street kid. They were two scraps of story, forever changed by their crossing. Rodrigo stood still for a moment that felt much longer than it really was. He held the coin between his fingers, staring at it like it couldn't be real, while the huge security guards waited for instructions. Sweat ran lightly down his brow, despite the cold outside. There was something in that tiny object slicing through all his pride, a memory, a fear. You could see it in his eyes, which turned icy cold the next heartbeat, snapping back to hardness. He breathed deep, restless. Just looking at the child huddled there, Rodrigo's shoulders rose. There was anger, sharp curiosity, and that strange discomfort nobody there could explain. He wanted to clear everyone out, get it all out of sight. But looking once more, coin still in hand, something stronger resisted. Bring that boy inside. Now. The voice rang out firm, but not as deep as usual. The two security guards exchanged a strange look, unsure if they'd heard right. No one ever brought a poor kid into that bank, especially not through the front door. The manager managed to raise one eyebrow, face stunned. Even so, they obeyed. Lucas cracked an eye open, startled. His hand still clutched the old piece of cloth, and he wouldn't let go of the amulet. His legs shook, still lying down, staring at the man in a suit barking orders. He figured he'd get it, like at other banks, or they'd take away the little he had. But this time, the shock was different. One guard crouched down, even with a bit of care, but Lucas drew his body back, pulling the cloth with him. He wouldn't let go of the coin, or the crumpled letter pressed to his chest. His small, filthy, cold hand seemed fused to them. The guard tried to speak softly, but his voice still sounded like thunder. Get up, kid. Come with me. Nothing will happen to you. Just come inside. The boy squeezed his eyes shut for a second. His breath came fast, a sound of fear louder than the rain outside. The wind pushed streaks of cold water in as the revolving door creaked. Other employees, some in tie and jacket, others just hovering near the door, stared at him like people look at someone sick or dirty. Rodrigo was up front, arms crossed, gaze hard, but that coin never left his hand. Each step Lucas took felt heavier. He walked slowly, stumbling over his own body, never looking up from his clenched hands. He clutched the amulet and letter so tightly his grimy fingers went white. The polished marble floor gleamed, reflecting lights so fake they seemed unreal. The difference between the world outside and in here was like a slap in the face. The air smelled different. Expensive coffee, perfume, money, not a hint of sweat or street. But no one said good afternoon. Just silence. Even the manager's heels clicking sharply sounded like a threat. The boy darted glances around, searching for an escape. The bank felt enormous. His eyes jumped from paintings on the wall, to the cameras above, to the glass doors to the conference room, but always returned to the man who'd summoned him. Rodrigo didn't blink. Lucas was led to a chair, far from the entrance, near the plush seats for VIP clients but set apart. The young men in suits whispered among themselves, some barely masking laughter, but Rodrigo didn't care. He stared at the boy, eyes loaded with unsaid things. Lucas sat stiff, bracing for the worst. He breathed through his nose, clutching his few belongings, until suddenly, nearly no one said a word in the bank. It was as if time had paused again, just like when the coin had dropped. Rodrigo stood up slowly, rubbing his thumb nervously along that coin. He walked toward Lucas, straightening his tie, searching for how to speak in a way that was simple, direct. But he paused for a second, staring at the engraving glinting on the coin. The boy kept his head down. He didn't cry, but you could see tears brimming, ready to spill. His lip was bitten, his body curled inward. Everything about him screamed to run. But his clutch on his things wouldn't break for anything. An employee arrived with a glass of water, setting it lightly on the table, as if the boy might shatter. Lucas didn't even glance at it. The huge wall clock echoed through the lobby, chiming the hour. Not yet 7:30. The telephone rang softly. Outside, heavy rain beat the glass. Something in the silence prodded Rodrigo. Old doubts, old violence, the fear of remembering. His fingers squeezed the coin, tighter each moment, until the knuckles hurt. For a moment, Rodrigo took another good look at the boy. Noticed his hair, the shape of his hands, a small cut on his chin, the same place his own son once split open jumping from the couch years ago. He swallowed hard. He didn't know what to do. Didn't even know how to ask, or if he should just demand answers from the boy, or throw everything away and return to normal life. But there was a knot in his chest, harder to swallow than pride. He thought of the important meeting waiting. The blank looks of his business partners, the judgmental glances, his ex-wife's voice, the face of his own son, lost forever. All that, in a second. But something heavier held his feet in that lobby. Was it the coin, or the boy's gaze? Everyone waited for an order. Everyone stared at Rodrigo. Only the boy, who just wanted to disappear, clung tight to a scrap of his mother, his past, and to whatever hope was left in the darkness of that grand hall. Rodrigo took a deep breath. The morning chill froze him to the bone. Even without speaking, he knew he would never walk out of here the same. The hall was empty but for the ticking wall clock and the far-off sound of water dripping on cold marble. Rodrigo entered again, this time with slower steps. He held the door behind him, breathed deep, and looked at the boy still sitting in the corner. His expensive coat brushed the floor, a light echo. He crouched, trying to meet Lucas at his level. You could tell he wasn't used to this, the face stern, the words carefully chosen. Lucas stared back. His face was dirty, shadows under his eyes, hair in wild tangles. The skin around his eyes was roughed up from too many sleepless nights. Fear had him holding the amulet so fiercely, as if it might vanish if he let go. Rodrigo noticed this motion, that childish instinct to protect what little was left. The banker tried to start a conversation, his voice faltered low. He spoke about food, about a bed for the night. The way he said it made food sound trivial, but Lucas's stomach punctuated the point. It was almost torture to even mention it. Lucas didn't answer. He just nodded slowly, eyes fixed on Rodrigo's hands. Sweat trickled down the boy's neck, but he didn't release the coin. Even with hunger rumbling audibly, fear shouted louder. His trembling lips said it all. He squeezed the crumpled paper in his other pocket, as if holding tight could bring his mother back. Rodrigo cleared his throat, trying to shake off the awkwardness. The silence pressed in hard. Outside, rain still fell, just a wide pane of glass separating the bank's false warmth from the raw cold street. No one spoke for a while. You could hear distant security guards whispering, unable to grasp what was happening inside. Rodrigo took another deep breath, rolled the coin through his fingers, stared down. He tried again, a little softer this time, but the boy's hunger didn't overcome his distrust. Lucas gazed up, big eyes still clinging to a thin hope, but you could see the certainty in his chest. He couldn't trust anyone. He smelled of cold, rain, a kind of sadness most grown-ups can't bear. Rodrigo thought of sending someone else to deal with all this, but something kept him there. Maybe it was the way the boy lowered his chin to his chest, as if bracing for a punishment he knew too well. There was no courage, only fear. Rodrigo's heart ached, a memory poking at him, an old hurt he'd buried for years. The banker pulled a chocolate from his pocket, cradled it in both hands, and offered it to Lucas. Not a word about the coin or the letter, just a gesture. The wrapper caught the light, almost beckoning. Lucas's eyes widened a little, but he didn't reach out. Fear commanded his body. He was used to promises that turned to lies, food that appeared only to be snatched away if he didn't do as told. The boy let out a little sob, wiping his nose quickly on the ragged cloth he used as a blanket. Rodrigo caught the strong scent of that worn scrapped street, rain, the sweat of too many nights without shelter. You could see Lucas's whole life in that filthy bundle. He bit his lip, hesitated, tears pricking his eyes. But he clamped his jaw, trying to act tough, the way the streets had taught him. Rodrigo tried not to show anything on his face. But it was odd, in that room full of luxury and hush, a man who knew every trick to making money now negotiating with a wary child. Lucas's eyes shone, but not with happiness. It was the wary shine of a kid calculating how far he could go without getting hit, without losing what little remained. The banker asked quietly again, "How'd you get that coin?" Lucas squeezed it hard enough to make his hand tremble. He looked at the floor, then up for just a second, almost as if to say with his gaze, "If I tell you, nothing good will come of it." His stomach growled again, louder now. It sounded so rough Rodrigo winced. Heavier silence rolled back in. The boy finally tucked his forehead to his knee, hiding his face, his voice barely a whisper. "Can't say." Rodrigo shut his eyes a moment. His face tightened, trying to mask his own pain. He thought of his own son, the last time he'd heard that same empty stomach rumble, remembered the scent of baby shampoo, childish laughter echoing in the big, empty house. In that hush, you could feel Lucas's fear sticking to the air, the kind that doesn't disappear with food or a blanket. That hidden letter, already nearly torn, maybe was the last thing tying him to any old happiness. So Rodrigo tried a new tack, blunt and clear. "Look, I'm not going to take anything from you. I just want to know where you found that coin. You don't have to give it, just tell me." Even he could hear his voice come out strange, almost forced. Lucas just shook his head. Finally, tears slipped down his cheeks, but he squeezed his eyes shut, refusing to sob out loud. The silence grew even harder to bear. Rodrigo wanted to stand up and leave, disappear from this confusing moment, but he couldn't. He sat there, nearly at the boy's height, feeling the cold seat under his legs, waiting for any reaction at all. The old clock ticked, ticked. The whole bank seemed to have paused just to wait for the boy's answer. Rodrigo fidgeted in his pocket, leaned forward as if that might help. Outside, rain lashed harder. The noise battered the windows, made everything seem far away. Lucas said nothing. He held on tight to what little of his mother, his story, his past, no one had ever wanted to hear. And for an instant, it was as if everyone there, the banker, the boy, even the guard at the door, knew this was never about the coin or food. It was about trust, and that was something the boy didn't have to give. And without a word, Rodrigo somehow understood that there, in front of him, was a kind of courage no money could buy. So he decided not to rush. He stayed, staring, enduring his own inner chill, hoping somehow to bridge the vast distance between himself and that child broken by life. The rain still drummed outside, but now, inside, it seemed farther away. The scent of hot food filled the room, fresh rice, a shiny piece of beef, beans as dark as the circles beneath the boy's eyes, and a bit of potato. The cook, Dona Ana, set the plate on the table with a different look, not just doing her job, but like a grandmother seeing her grandson after months apart. She didn't say a word, just waved her hand. "Go ahead, eat," and quickly stepped away. Lucas didn't move at first. He sat in a chair far too big for him, feet swinging above the marble, back slightly hunched from hugging the grubby cloth amulet and the crumpled letter as if it was life and death. He had the plate, then glanced around the hall, sometimes peeking up at the cold, elegant man across from him, arms crossed, just watching. Rodrigo tried to make sense of it all, why he felt irritated, uncomfortable, almost at a loss. He stared at the little boy holding his food like a stray dog, ready to bolt at the first threat. The sound of rain outside filled the silence inside. Lucas picked up the fork. His hand trembled a little, dirty from days and too long on the streets. He cut the meat slowly, chewed with care, almost like he didn't believe it was real, like each bite was proof he was actually there. Instead of wolfing the food down like a starving child, he ate tiny bites, glancing around sideways, at the floor, at the plate, never at Rodrigo's eyes. Donna Ana left, gently closing the kitchen door. Now it was just the two of them. The clink of the fork on the plate broke the silence from time to time, the cold pressed against the windows. Rodrigo took in the scene, feeling an ache in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He noticed small details, the boy's hair, wet and stuck to his forehead, the stains on his skin where even tears couldn't wash away the filth. A memory landed, unexpectedly hard. The way the boy held his food reminded Rodrigo of his own son. Years ago, the suspicious look on the boy's face when eating something new. That face still haunted him, despite his best efforts to forget it. His son, the lost coin, that emptiness always opening wider in quiet moments. Lucas chewed slowly, as if afraid to eat too fast and lose it all. From time to time, he clutched the letter and the amulet still harder, till his knuckles turned white. His eyes stayed alert, searching for a hiding place in a room so clean, so fragrant, so foreign. Rodrigo recognized the distance between them, enormous, though only a table separated them. Why won't this boy speak? He wondered. He tried to break the ice, cleared his throat, but came out sounding harsh and gruff. All he managed was, "Is the food okay?" The boy just nodded, a tiny gesture, almost invisible. Inside, Rodrigo wanted to ask more, but didn't know how. The silence thickened, filled the room. He heard the echo of silverware, the ticking of an expensive clock, the far-off drip of rain on glass. The more he watched Lucas, the more he noticed the raw fear in the boy's eyes. And the more he thought of his son's face, those rushed mornings, the calls for attention he pretended not to hear, the empty Sundays after the tragedy. Lucas glanced at the letter, made a tiny motion, hugging the crumpled page close to his chest, wary even of the passing air. He wouldn't let it go for anything. Rodrigo saw filthy fingers tracing the envelope with infinite care. Each bite, the boy looked at the plate as if giving thanks but never trusting luck. The sadness ran deep. A skinny chest, eyes too big for a small face, a vibe of survive now, feel later. Rodrigo noticed something else. It wasn't just hunger. It was hunger mixed with fear, for food and for care at the same time. A knot formed in his throat, because understanding that meant facing something within himself, a lack he also carried, disguised as arrogance, hurry, and profit. The atmosphere in the hall was cold even with warm food. Lucas never stopped watching his letter and amulet, but once in a while, he'd glance at the man across the table. Rodrigo only offered silence, that heavy stare known to the wounded. The rain grew heavier, pounding the walls. The smell of food faded. Rodrigo considered asking about the amulet, the letter, the coin still tucked away, but said nothing. It wasn't the time. You had to respect the boy's silence, that careful hunger, his fear. Lucas finished his meal, slow. He didn't ask for more. He just nudged the plate forward, quietly, almost as if wanting more was asking too much. He sat there, hugging what remained of his mother, the letter, the amulet, the coin, and now even the faint warmth of a full belly. Rodrigo looked away, ashamed of himself. He pictured his son, all that might have gone differently. His heart pounded oddly. He stayed there, seated, trying to figure out why this boy affected him so much without saying a word. The rain fell outside, but in here, everything held still, silence, memory, sated hunger, and 1,000 unanswered questions between a man and a boy struggling to survive. The scent of food lingered, but Lucas no longer paid his empty plate any mind. He sat quietly at the edge of his chair, fidgeting with the scrap of cloth he treated like a lucky charm. Rodrigo remained there, wearing his stern expression, spending more time watching than any normal adult might. Between them, the wall clock kept slicing through the quiet. Tick, tock. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. Rodrigo glanced again at the boy's thin hands. Lucas still wouldn't let go of two things, the grubby amulet dangling from a bit of shoelace, and that crumpled letter, folded 1,000 times. Rodrigo couldn't stop staring at the letter. There was something about it, tugging at something deep inside him, a cocktail of curiosity and discomfort, as if it called his name in a whisper. He cleared his throat, tried to sound casual, but his voice came out softer than intended. "What VE you got in that letter, kid?" Lucas hugged the letter tighter to his chest, fast. His eyes grew huge, startled in an instant. You could see he was afraid someone would snatch away his last scrap of family. Rodrigo took a deep breath, almost impatient, but seeing the fear in the boy's face, he hesitated. "I just want to look. I'm not going to take anything. You can trust me," he found himself saying, almost absent-mindedly. He had no idea why. It wasn't the sort of thing he ever told anyone. Lucas looked quickly around, his hand trembling. He bit his lip, fixing his gaze on the floor as if willing it to open up and swallow him. The only sound in the room was his breathing. Rodrigo waited, pretending indifference, though he couldn't take his eyes off the boy. Something behind that letter seemed capable of changing everything. After a long silence, slowly, as if handing over a secret to the wind, Lucas drew the letter from his grubby old shirt. He held it out to Rodrigo with a reluctant hand, staring more at the floor than at him. The banker took it, trying to mask his anxiety. The son in the hospital, his wife's tears, years ago, flashes flickered by like shadows across rain-blurred glass. The paper was yellowed, damp at the edges, smelling of the street, of sweat, of a difficult life. Rodrigo unfolded it with care, not wanting to tear it, and instantly recognized his sister's handwriting. The rounded, looping script, just like the birthday note she used to leave on the table when they still shared the same house. His stomach knotted. The boy watched him, tense, braced for judgment. Rodrigo tried to read, but his eyes blurred almost immediately. The letter started simply, "My son, if you're reading this." The rest was smudged lines. She wrote about hope, begged forgiveness for her absence, explained why she'd made certain choices. She told him never to let go of what he carried at his heart, because love and courage were the only inheritance. At that moment, Rodrigo felt an enormous weight descend. He had to bite his tongue not to cry right there in front of the boy. The last line spoke of family and fate. The world is hard, but family finds its way back. Look for someone holding that old coin, it'll show you the way home. Lucas watched, silent. His shoulders sank, as if he'd given up on expecting anything from anyone. Even huddled in the chair, he searched Rodrigo's face with a blend of hope and fear, trying to gauge if those words meant anything to this man too. No one said anything for a long while, just the ticking clock sliced the hush. Rodrigo ran a hand slowly down his face, hiding the redness of his eyes. His pride was immense, but just then it felt so small. He thought about the years without speaking to his sister, the stupid fights, the wasted time. Now, standing before her son, the truth hit him like a downpour. His heart pounded, so loud he could almost hear it. The smells of coffee and bread faded. Only the creeping cold filtered in, cutting through the space. Rodrigo breathed deeply, trying to stay composed, but his mind spun. So much past, so much left unspoken, and this boy, so close, so unknown. He handed the letter back to Lucas with a slow gesture, unable to speak for several seconds. He just met the boy's eyes, a silent apology too heavy for words. Lucas took it back and cradled it to his chest as if it were a piece of his mother brought to life. He gazed at the floor again, sniffled quietly, doing his best to hide it. Rodrigo stood up and walked to the window, searching for air. The world outside was gray. Drizzle streaked the glass. A barefoot kid ran on the sidewalk. Drivers honked, rushing past. He stood there, seeing it all, seeing nothing. You could hear the sound of guilt itself. Deep down, a need to protect the boy grew, tangled up with fear of what might come next. He was ashamed to admit it, but the feeling was real. He didn't bother hiding it anymore. Behind him, Lucas carefully folded the letter, wrapped the amulet with it, and sat there small, waiting for whatever would happen next. And for the first time in years, Rodrigo understood what it meant to lose and to find, both at once. Rodrigo couldn't meet the boy's eyes anymore. In the past few days, he'd avoided the upstairs hallway where Lucas stayed. If he heard a noise behind the door, he found an excuse to turn around and leave. Inside his chest, a strange feeling grew, like something heavy pressing the air out, squeezing the very edges of his heart. At the bank, even the email exchanges had changed tone. People who'd never bothered to chat now approached hesitantly, eyeing him sideways, asking in embarrassed whispers, "Is it true you're taking in that street kid?" Rodrigo would take a deep breath every time he heard this, pride flaring up. He'd lift his chin, mutter, "Personal matters," and carry on, feigning indifference. But inside, every whisper was like a shove out of his own castle. There was lunch with the partners. It was supposed to be about rates and investments, but the conversation spun out of control. This business with the boy, Rodrigo, Sergio's voice, his friend for decades, was heavy with concern. "It's not a good look. People are talking." Someone bolder even joked, half smiling, "Soon it'll be a trend. Next thing you know, our shares will drop." No one really laughed. At night the house changed color with the silence. It was so big, it seemed empty, full of echoes, too cold to be a real home. Rodrigo watched the boy's silhouette sitting on his bedroom floor, turning the coin between his fingers with infinite care, like it was a priceless jewel. The boy barely made a sound, just breathed, looking through the window as if seeing a whole other world beyond clean glass. Rodrigo tossed in bed, but whenever he closed his eyes, he'd see his sister's shaky handwriting, the pain packed between the letters' lines. He remembered the last time they'd seen each other. Worse, he remembered all that went unsaid. And now, out of nowhere, a boy lying on the bank doorstep, holding tight to the very thing he'd tried to forget. He didn't know if it was anger or shock or just shame for the entire past. At breakfast 2 days later, Rodrigo could barely look at Lucas. The boy sat quietly, near the end of the table, hands buried in his pockets, not touching the bread. The silence was so thick, it made chewing hard. Lucas looked quickly around, like a startled animal sensing danger it couldn't name. When Rodrigo tried to ask if he wanted more chocolate, the words came out gruff, his voice sharp as a scold. The boy only shook his head, saying nothing. His big eyes were full of doubt, searching desperately for any sign of kindness and finding none. Every now and then, Rodrigo wished he could apologize for being so distant, for treating Lucas like a burden, for not knowing how to show he cared without seeming weak. But he couldn't even muster up the courage for that. He kept remembering his own childhood, the way his father would yell at the slightest mistake, the nights spent lying awake, hoping for praise that never came. He promised himself never to get attached, to never get hurt again. And now, this skinny, battered little boy was chipping away at the last bit of armor he had left around his heart. One day, Rodrigo came home late from work. It had rained nonstop all day. He walked in, peeled off his wetsuit jacket, and paused when he saw Lucas sitting on the stairs, making paper boats out of pamphlets from the bank. The boy's clothes were too big, borrowed from someone on the cleaning staff. His hair was still matted with grime, his bare feet constantly trying to hide themselves. Rodrigo cleared his throat awkwardly, searching for something, anything, to say. But Lucas didn't even look up. He just kept folding, pressing the paper into shape, like it was the most important thing in the world. Rodrigo noticed a tear clinging to the boy's cheek. He wasn't really crying. Maybe he didn't even have the strength for that anymore. The tears just fell. That hurt more than 1,000 words. The next morning, Rodrigo's cousin showed up at the bank, heels clattering across the marble floor. She brought gossip, worries, motherly advice, all of it at once. "This isn't the place for that boy," she said. "You'll get too involved. You'll never be able to let go. And what if people start to complain? You'll lose respect." Rodrigo didn't reply. He caught a glimpse of his own reflection in a window. He looked older, more worn out, eyes red from sleepless nights, hair disheveled. He, who had always been the family's rock, now at a loss before an 8-year-old child. All day, Rodrigo found himself staring at the phone, debating whether to call social services to handle it the right way. But he couldn't do it. There was always an excuse, a new project, another meeting. At night, the couch seemed harder, more uncomfortable than ever. Rodrigo spent hours rifling through his sister's papers, rereading a crumpled letter, trying to piece together the puzzle in his own chest. It was hard to admit, even to himself, that he wanted to protect that boy. He didn't know why. He couldn't even begin to imagine what future awaited if he did what everyone expected. Let it go, carry on, shut his heart again. Sometimes, he felt the urge to scream, to disappear, to beg someone else to make the decision for him. But no one could. Only he could. At the end of that third day, Rodrigo climbed the stairs in silence. He stopped at the doorway and saw Lucas curled up, sleeping, clutching his mother's letter to his chest as if it were a shield. On the boy's face, there was no longer hope, just exhaustion. Rodrigo opened his mouth, but no words came out. He went back down, sat alone in the darkness of the living room, bitterness flooding his mouth. There, alone, he finally understood what it meant to lose everything, and to not know if you even dared try again. Pride was a comfortable house. But what if he decided to leave it? No one imagines how a metropolis can tremble at 8 o'clock at night, when cold and rain mix together. The bank's glass reflected a soaked city, everything draped in gray, lamplight casting warped shadows over puddles. It was just after 8 when Rodrigo left the main hall. It had been an unbearable day. Murmurs everywhere, sidelong glances, people coming and going in the bank long after hours. He just wanted to breathe, to go home, to forget Lucas for a few minutes. The tall hallway seemed even bigger at that hour, the kind of silence where every step feels heavy. The security guard offered him an umbrella, but Rodrigo just waved him off, annoyed, pressing his jacket tighter against his chest. Inside, Lucas had retreated to a nook near the coffee machines, nibbling on a piece of stale bread left over from lunch. He was fidgety, glancing repeatedly at the door, his legs swinging out of sync, the look of a child who can't decide whether to wait or to run. Outside, the rain was getting heavier. The electric gate snapped shut with a dry crack, and Rodrigo quickened his pace along the empty sidewalk. But before he could reach his car, he noticed three figures crossing the street. Hoods up, hands buried in pockets, moving much too fast for such a cold night. He pretended not to see, picked up his pace. But some sounds in the city never lie. When he heard the first, "Hey, Doc," a chill ran down his spine. The tallest of them got right up close. He was just a boy, couldn't be more than 15, face narrow from hunger, a ripped T-shirt under a threadbare hoodie. The other, smaller, grinned with a single tooth, spinning a pocket knife in his hand. The third hung back, staring at the ground, as if wishing he were elsewhere. Rodrigo tried to stay calm, reached for his pocket, but his voice shook. "Leave me alone. I'm a client of this bank. There are security guards." The tallest one let out a dry laugh. "Tonight, the street's in charge, man." Rodrigo's hand instinctively went for his ID badge, already trembling, when suddenly he heard shouting from behind. It all happened so fast. He barely saw Lucas bursting out the door, stumbling on the step, hitting his knee on the wet pavement, but getting up, eyes wide, chest heaving. When Lucas saw who it was, he froze, as if hoping they might all still be friends. "Don't do it, Megala. He helped me." This Megala, the tallest, glared at Lucas, but there was a flicker of fear too, like he wasn't sure of anything anymore. "Go away, Lucas. This isn't your life now." But Lucas didn't move. He took a deep breath, stepped forward, and stood between Rodrigo and the others. Small, skinny, his face streaked with rain and tears. His hands shook, but he didn't budge. All Rodrigo could see was the hair plastered to the boy's forehead, the look of desperation in his eyes. "If you want to hit someone, hit me." He didn't do anything. Megala hesitated. The one with the knife cursed and tried to shove Lucas aside, but he crouched and stayed put. Rodrigo's heart pounded like never before. It wasn't just the fear of being robbed. It was a new fear, almost childlike, of losing someone he hadn't even realized belonged to him. The smallest one got annoyed, raised the knife, stepped closer. Lucas lifted his arms, as if about to protect Rodrigo, or maybe inviting them. "Okay, do your worst to me." Rodrigo felt a flush rising up his face. He shouted without thinking, voice hoarse. "Don't you touch him. You hear me? You leave that boy alone." In that fraction of a second, Rodrigo saw, in Megala's eyes, an old longing, the kind you have when someone once saved you, but no one ever called you son again. Megala cursed, dropped his gaze, and pushed the others away. The boy with the knife started forward, but then gave up. He looked at Lucas as if trying to understand why anyone would choose to protect a rich man. And Lucas stayed there, shaking head to toe, clutching a token in his back pocket, puffing up his chest, trying to look bigger than he was. Rodrigo, suddenly, wanted nothing more than to pull the boy close, to shield him, to run far away with the child in his arms, just like he used to with his son, all those years ago. But all he could manage was to slowly rest a hand on Lucas's trembling shoulder, feeling each drop of freezing rain soaking into his clothes. The group drifted off, cursing, kicking cans. Megala looked back and muttered, low enough for only Rodrigo to hear, "That one's got real guts." The street grew noisy again, cars rushing by, distant horns. But the two of them stood still for a long time. Rodrigo took a deep breath, feeling pain all over his body. He realized that no amount of money, no name on a building, could protect you from a scare like that. More than that, the thought of losing that boy filled him with panic. Somewhere in his heart, that fear was new, but it was also the oldest fear of all. Inside, in the bank's faint warmth, Lucas finally collapsed, cold, scared, but wouldn't let go of his token. He pressed his head against the glass, eyelids drooping with exhaustion. Rodrigo ordered coffee, sat beside him, and stayed quiet for a long time. He watched the boy and noticed something strange. Maybe, for the first time in ages, he wasn't alone. And he had no idea what to do with this new certainty that clung to him like rain on his suit, impossible to ignore. Rodrigo barely slept that night. The image of Lucas's frightened eyes, the small body curled behind him once it was all over, wouldn't leave him. He could still hear the rain beating against the glass, the echoes of shouts on the sidewalk, that heavy silence packed with words neither one had the courage to say. At the kitchen table, Rodrigo stared into his coffee, his cup trembling a bit in his grip. No matter how hard he tried, he kept seeing that split second when Lucas threw himself between him and the thieves. It had been automatic, almost irrational. And it cut deep. A gang of street boys, armed with little more than fear, yelling, demanding money. Lucas, desperate, leaping to his defense. All for him, a stranger. A hard knot twisted in his chest. How many years had he spent hiding behind routine, behind business? The old Rodrigo, cold, distant, doubting any good deed in the world. But Lucas was something different. The next day dawned under heavy gray skies, as if the whole city were mourning. In the office, Rodrigo locked himself away and asked not to be disturbed. But he couldn't focus on anything except that boy. It wasn't just guilt, not pity. It was something bigger, something he'd never named before. There was something there he desperately needed to understand, as if life itself were screaming that this wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. He picked up his phone and called his assistant, Luciana. Her voice was sleepy on the other end, but Rodrigo didn't notice. I need you to find everything you can about this boy. Lucas. His history, records at City Hall, old files, whatever you can. And call the social services office in the neighborhood where he said he lived with his mother. Luciana sounded startled but didn't question him. He'd always been tough, never one to ask about anyone, least of all a street kid. Rodrigo hung up, staring into the distance, fiddling with his wedding ring, which he no longer wore. Time passed slowly. The city's noise was muted by the rain outside, dripping down glass, distant barking, car horns below, a constant hum. Rodrigo paced the room, his back aching. Every time he closed his eyes, it was Lucas's face. And that coin, with the same inscription his own son had carried before the accident. That memory still hurt, in a way he longed to escape. When the phone finally rang again, the sound startled him. Luciana spoke softly, her voice slightly nervous. Sir, I just got a few documents from City Hall. The boy's name really is Lucas. Lucas Moraes. Born here, in Sao Paulo. And there's something else, her tone faltered, as if she was afraid of how he'd react. It says here his mother was Maria Clara Alves Reis. At the sound of the name, Rodrigo froze. He stared at his hands, shaking a little, as if waiting to wake up from an old nightmare. Maria Clara. He hadn't seen his sister in years. Not since the falling out, since she had disappeared from the family's radar. He'd only heard scattered news, always about hardship, poverty, her struggle to raise her son. And he'd chosen not to get involved. Didn't want to see, didn't want to help. The realization hit like a slap. There's a handwritten letter in the files, sir. It was meant to be given to the family. Seems important, Luciana added. Rodrigo felt his chest constrict, as though someone had wrung him out from the inside. For the first time in years, he had no idea what to do. He jumped up from his chair. He paced the office like a caged lion, his face drawn, marked by something heavier than lack of sleep. The pieces were fitting together. The lost boy, the frightened look, the coin, the letter. It couldn't just be chance. Taking a deep breath, he called another old employee, Pedro, who used to work at the front desk in the building where Maria Clara had lived. The old man recognized Rodrigo's voice right away, but didn't hide his surprise. Lucas? Yes, boss. He was a good boy, polite, you know? His mother went through a lot. She died a few months ago. The boy was left alone, tried to make it on his own. I haven't seen him since, but it broke my heart, Pedro recalled, his voice thick, as if he'd been waiting all along for someone in the family to ask after the boy. In that moment, listening to this, something clicked in Rodrigo. All that indifference, all that distance, like he'd spent years anesthetized behind his own pride. He'd always told himself family was a burden, that feelings were a weakness. But now there was a boy sleeping on the steps of his bank, carrying around in his chest all the wounds Rodrigo himself had helped cause. He remembered when his sister called asking for help. He'd refused. Said he was busy. Had a meeting. It couldn't wait. I'll talk to you tomorrow. But he never did. He opened a drawer and took out the old family photo, smiles from a better time, his younger sister laughing with her arms around him. The boy in the picture could have been Lucas, if luck had gone the other way. Rodrigo stared at the photo, feeling everything inside shake. He clung to it like someone wishing to go back in time, thinking somehow it could erase the pain. But nothing could erase it. Deep down, he knew. He couldn't run from this anymore. Lucas was his nephew. The boy he should have protected, should have loved from the start. That pain was guilt, and a monstrous fear that he'd already lost his last chance to make things right. Rain drummed against the windows. The smell of stale coffee hung in the room. Memories of the night, Lucas, small, brave, defending him as if he were family. Rodrigo sat in his chair and finally let some of the tears fall. He stayed that way a long while, searching for words, trying to figure out what to do now, with this new burden and this unexpected chance in his hands. Only a long while later did he pick up the phone again and say, simply, "Find my sister. Do the impossible. I can't lose anyone else." Rodrigo stood in the hallway, gripping his own hands as he waited. The clock on the wall ticked nervously, and for a moment, he thought about turning back, running from this truth that exposed all his guilt. But the sound of her footsteps echoing across the cold floor brought him back. Each step seemed to pull the ground out from under him. He looked at the door. She walked in, awkward, looking smaller than he remembered. Her face was pale, drawn, with deep shadows under her eyes. When their eyes met, a knot stuck in Rodrigo's chest. Neither spoke. She trembled, clutching her bag to herself, as if she still had to protect herself from everything. He tried to smile, but it was just a half-formed motion of the lips. The silence was broken only by the tears that started to stream from her face before she was even close. Lucas was there in the corner, small, hugging the crumpled letter to his chest. He looked scared, but his eyes shone with a strange mix of fear and hope, as if he already sensed something coming to life, something he'd dreamed about but never believed was possible. He curled up tighter, hiding his face under his arm as he felt the woman's gaze on him. She knelt in front of the boy without a word. Her hair ran down, what with rain and tears. Her fingers shook as she reached out to touch Lucas's hand. In that moment, the world held its breath, as if all the city noise had faded away. The only sounds were her shaky breathing and the boy's muffled sobs. It took a second before Lucas looked up. He searched her eyes, searching for an answer across all the faces he'd seen sleeping on the street. The two of them stayed like that, looking each other over. Suddenly, the woman cupped her son's face, pulled him toward her, and pressed her forehead to his. She sobbed aloud. Lucas clung to her neck and broke down completely, the kind of cry no one dares interrupt. Rodrigo stood there, watching, his heart collapsing inside his chest. His pride, coldness, arrogance, none of it made any sense anymore. He wiped his face, trying to hide his own tears, but his eyes were red, and his entire body shook. Rodrigo's sister stroked Lucas's hair, breathing in the scent of her son as if she needed to be sure he was real. She spoke softly, "It's you? It's really you, my love." Lucas couldn't answer, only cry, his exhausted body finally resting in the lap he dreamed of for so long. The bank security guard watched from a distance, trying to piece together what little he could. Even the receptionist looked up from her monitor, moved, knowing that scene was bigger than any meeting or deposit passing through those doors. Rodrigo approached slowly, nearly tripping over his own feet. Each step was an apology that he didn't really know how to put into words. He looked at his sister, a mix of shame and hope, and managed to stammer, "I'm sorry. For everything. I should have looked for you. I made a lot of mistakes." She looked up, her face wet, meeting his eyes with an ancient hurt. But in that moment, the past didn't matter. It was all about now. She motioned for Rodrigo to join them. He didn't hesitate. He lowered himself to the cold floor beside them. In silence, fighting his tears, he embraced them both. It was a tight hug, a mixture of sobs and hands clinging together as if they could glue everyone together for good. No words, no explanations. Only emotion, that irreplaceable human warmth Lucas had never known before. The boy stayed between the two adults, listening to the sounds of their tears, feeling their hands grip tighter. The scent of his mother, her touch, her tangled hair against his own filthy hair, it all became one. And for the first time, Lucas wasn't afraid to close his eyes and believe it was real. They stayed like that for a while no one could measure. The blaring of avenue horns, the patter of rain outside, the bank's harsh lighting all faded away. In that embrace, there was no hunger, no abandonment, no anger, no doubt. Rodrigo looked at his nephew's face. He saw a piece of himself there. The boy still clutched the coin in his small hand, and the letter, now nearly falling apart with time. Rodrigo touched them gently and promised in a whisper, "Nothing will ever separate us again." His sister nodded, crying, managing only, "Thank you," between sobs. It was more than a wound healed. She knew no one could change lost time, but they could do things differently from now on. For the first time in a long while, she felt hope. Lucas looked at his mother, then at his uncle, and in their eyes, he saw a future. He felt this was the beginning of the home he'd always imagined but had never even dared to picture while he slept on the sidewalk, cold and afraid. In the silence, only emotion. Each of them lost in their own memories, letting the pain wash out with their tears. And without saying anything more, they all understood. From that instant, nothing would be the same. Rodrigo's heart opened up. His sister's was finally at peace. and Lucas's, for the first time, felt whole. Rodrigo spent the night wide awake. Not like before, worrying about profits, reports, that quiet fear of losing control of his empire. Now, it was different. Lucas's and his sister's faces wouldn't leave his mind. They replayed in silence, every tear, every trembling embrace, that commingling of pain and hope when mother and child were reunited. He felt an emptiness in his chest, but at the same time, something new growing, a strange heat rising from deep inside, urging him forward. The next morning, when the sun tried to peek through the gray sky, Rodrigo was already up. He drank his coffee without tasting it. From the guest room, he could hear a bit of laughter, Lucas and his mother, sleeping together for the first time in years. It made his eyes sting again. He took a deep breath, gathered himself, and put on his tie with more care than usual. On the drive to the bank, everything seemed to have changed color, not on the outside, since the city was still gray, damp, cars blending into the nearly unbroken rain. The change was inside. Rodrigo looked at the streets with new eyes. He noticed the old man sitting every day in front of the pharmacy, the woman with 2 kids asking for change at the stoplight. Before, he used to avoid looking. Now he couldn't look away. Somehow, it all cut deep. At the bank, the staff could tell. He came in without his usual air of urgency. He greeted the receptionist and, for the first time, asked her name. She smiled, surprised, and Rodrigo realized she was probably about his sister's age. The hallway to the executive office seemed longer. He passed curious stares, some wary. A young employee froze as Rodrigo approached, probably expecting the usual scolding. But that day, Rodrigo just gave a gentle gesture and asked if everything was good at home. The young man looked surprised, flustered even, but smiled back. In his office, Rodrigo sat alone for a few minutes. He gazed out the tall windows, taking in the rainy city. His mind wandered through everything he'd lived, imported cars, fancy parties, countless hours in meetings, that fleeting sense of accomplishment that never lasted. He thought about Lucas, sleeping outside, face curled up, trying to protect himself from the cold with nothing but a ripped rag. He thought about those sharp, wary eyes, clutching that coin like a scrap of hope. It was impossible to pretend none of it had happened. Rodrigo felt a lump in his throat. He grabbed the phone, hesitated, then decided he would use everything he had to make real change. Not just for Lucas, but for other children too. He spent the morning on the phone. He scheduled meetings with the city hall, reached out to architects, called furniture suppliers. He even went to the bank's legal department, the sector he'd always used for safeguarding assets, defending contracts. Now, he wanted to know what kind of place he could set up quickly, what paperwork was needed for a shelter. Some people were surprised. Others, frankly, suspicious. One partner even muttered that Rodrigo was inviting chaos. Some said it would ruin the bank's reputation. Rodrigo listened in silence. His chest tightened, but he didn't argue. For the first time, other people's opinions didn't seem so important. When he left the bank at the end of the day, the rain had stopped. The air was fresher. Rodrigo walked slowly down a nearby street. He looked around, taking in every child without a coat, every wary glance. His heart beat fast, but the guilt was no longer passive. Now it was a commitment. He felt the need to change things. He couldn't give back what time had taken, but maybe he could help stop others from suffering the same pain. The next day, the city's news outlets ran the headline, "Famous banker to open shelter for homeless children." Some doubted him, some mocked, but people's attitudes started to shift. Old clients stopped Rodrigo in the bank lobby to shake his hand. Residents talked at the markets, at bus stops. Even the security guard, who once eyed him warily, now smiled when Rodrigo walked past. The work started quickly. Rodrigo was there almost every day. He paid attention to every detail. He wanted big windows, colorful walls, space to play. He sat with social workers, listened to the children's stories, learned every name by heart. More than once, he found himself wiping his face, unable to hide the emotion. He met boys and girls with the same look Lucas had that first night, a mixture of hunger, fear, but also hope. At the bank, the change spread. Employees started organizing donation drives. Some donated clothes, toys, even books. Rodrigo saw it unfold and felt proud, a simple, quiet joy, so different from all the awards and honors of his old life. At home, Lucas would call Rodrigo over to watch cartoons, to build with blocks together, and sometimes he'd talk about his dreams. Rodrigo listened, smiling from the corners of his eyes. His sister had become a fixture at Sunday lunches. The silence of the past had given way to a gentle noise, the sound of affection, of family, of something alive. Even when the problems came, and they did come, because not everything is magic, Rodrigo never thought of giving up. He understood by now. It's the change inside that truly transforms what's outside. At the bank, around town, respect grew slowly alongside affection. Rodrigo Alves's name was no longer just a synonym for wealth. On that corner that used to be all cold and abandonment, now there was a place filled with light, the smell of hot food, and children's laughter. Whenever Rodrigo stepped inside, he felt his heart grow lighter. It was as if, finally, he, too, was home. When Lucas pushes open the door to his new room, he can hardly believe it's really for him. The air smells of clean laundry, fresh wood, and even from a distance you can feel the warmth of the blanket. He hesitates at the doorway, wide-eyed in disbelief. His small hand still clutches the amulet in his pocket, as if he's afraid he'll wake up and everything will disappear again. Rodrigo stands a little ways off, quiet, slightly distant, as if he too can't quite believe what he's seeing. It's not just the room that's different, it's the look on the boy's face. Lucas walks slowly over to the bed, runs a hand over the soft sheets, then sits and presses his fingers into the new comforter, feeling the texture. For a moment, he says nothing. His eyes fill with tears, but he refuses to let any fall. He takes a deep breath, as if he's trying to hold all the happiness inside him. Outside, a light drizzle patters on the window. Everything settles into silence. Only the gentle sound of rain can be heard, and that sound, which used to mean sadness, now perfectly matches the comfort of the room. Lucas looks around at everything that's his, a low wardrobe, colorful toys, shelves lined with books. The picture frame on the wall is still empty, waiting for his touch. And that's when he remembers his mother's letter. He pulls it from his pocket with the utmost care. The paper is nearly see-through from being handled so much. His fingers tremble. He breathes even deeper, scanning the walls until he finds just the right spot, right above the headboard. With a strip of tape, he sticks the letter there. For a few seconds, he just stares at the crumpled page, the crooked handwriting. To others, it might not mean much. But to him, it's strength. It's memory. It's the fulfillment of a promise that he'll never again have to sleep on the street, never be afraid of the dark. His face changes, slowly. That wary look makes room for a faint, shy, but genuine smile. The amulet, always hidden close to his chest, has a new home now. He finds a small box on the shelf, one of those simple organizers, and places the amulet in it, right beside the rare coin. His hands hesitate a moment. It's a mix between wanting to protect and wanting to show pride, because now these treasures aren't just about survival, they're the memory of a family, a reminder that the love he thought was lost had found its way back. Rodrigo watches all of this silently. There's something new in his eyes. Once cold, calculating, now he seems to feel every movement the boy makes, every nervous breath. Suddenly, he notices Lucas looking at him, a little awkward, as if to say thank you, without needing words. Lucas tries on new shoes he's been given. He looks at his feet, surprised by the unfamiliar weight, walking back and forth, testing out the idea that no one will take them when he sleeps. Deep down, he's still afraid, and it shows in the way he checks the door, as if wanting to make sure he can still run if he needs to. But little by little, the suspicion fades. The smell of dinner drifts down the hall, a plate of steaming rice, real beans, juicy meat. Lucas can't remember the last time he ate like this. He hears the other kids laughing downstairs and feels something strange inside. He wants to laugh too. To sit beside people, to listen to stories, to not worry about being kicked out tomorrow. At that moment, Rodrigo calls for him, voice gentle, almost like he's calling his own son. Lucas stands, breathes in the clean pajamas he's just put on, and smiles a little. He leaves the room slowly, but before stepping out, he touches his mother's letter on the wall. He lingers for a few seconds, as if promising himself that from that day on, he'll be happy. In the living room, the children play. One girl tugs Lucas by the hand, wanting to show him a new drawing. At first, he pulls his arm back, defensive out of habit. But the girl insists. Her smile is wide and true. Lucas dares a small smile in return and follows her, shy but already lighter. Rodrigo watches the moment without blinking. He feels a warmth in his chest. He says nothing, but his eyes shine, as if something inside him is healing too. With every step that boy takes, it's like the past drifts further away. At bedtime, Lucas returns to his room. He sits on his bed, looks around, and before turning out the lights, he gently runs his hand over the amulet and the coin. There's no need to hide them anymore. Now they have a special place, safe from anyone who'd steal them. Now they're trophies, not secrets. He lies down, pulls the blanket up to his chin, and finally closes his eyes without fear. His face softens. Little by little, the bad memories fade. A smile stays with him as he sleeps. For the first time, Lucas dreams of the future, not of the cold street outside. Here, he's found more than shelter. He's found peace, the kind so many are born into, but he had to fight so hard to claim for himself. Outside, the rain is already moving on, giving way to the gentle quiet of the early hours. Inside the four simple walls of his room is a real home, a boy who feels safe, in the start of a new story. The sound of children running on the lawn is all giggles and shouts of surprise. The wind still carries some of last night's chill, but the sun has come back to warm every corner of the home's garden. Seated on a wooden bench in a peaceful corner, Rodrigo sits with Lucas to one side and the boy's mother on the other. The three of them make a strange little portrait, almost shy, wary of a moment that seems simple, but weighs heavy inside them and beats strong. Lucas holds a slightly squished sandwich in his lap, eyes curious, mixed with that old fear of losing it all again. He watches the other children on the swings and sometimes looks down, as if to check if the ground is really stable beneath his feet. His mother's letter, now clean and without its old creases, rests between his hands the way you hold something precious, as if to guarantee beautiful things won't disappear this time. Every now and then, Lucas's gaze meets Rodrigo's, and a bit of that doubt is still there. Is this real? Will it last? Rodrigo, who was always so afraid of showing weakness, takes a deep breath as he looks at his nephew. He remembers the past, everything he's lost. He notices Lucas's small fingernails, still caked with dirt, and feels both guilty and grateful at once. Guilty for never having looked, for never having really asked questions, for only waking up to all this because a coin fell to the floor. And grateful because, in a twisted way, fate had crossed their paths again, giving them a second chance, even if it came late in life. Lucas's mother still can't believe she's there. Her face shows the exhaustion of someone who's lived through too much for one lifetime. Red eyes from so much crying, small smiles of relief and surprise. She grips her son's hand tight, and when she realizes, she lets go, chuckling softly, a little embarrassed, not wanting to suffocate him. Her eyes keep flitting between Rodrigo and Lucas, trying to get used to the scene. She doesn't know whether to give thanks, to apologize, or just to savor the silence. The smell of fresh bread fills the air. Inside, other kids talk quietly in the hallway, some still unsure what shelter really means. Time seems to move differently there, slowly, carefully, as if it knows these people need a gentler pace in order to learn to trust again. Rodrigo watches as Lucas bites into his sandwich, chewing slowly, as if every mouthful is more precious than any fortune. Between bites, Lucas lifts his eyes to the open sky. Thin clouds drift by, and he traces cars and animals and their shapes. When his mother asks, her voice barely above a whisper, "What do you see up there, son?" he just gives her a half-smile, no explanation needed. Their silence isn't one of shame, it's one of relief. And although their smiles are shy, no one forgets what they've been through. The scars are still there, in the adult's stooped shoulders, in the way Lucas recoils when a stranger comes too near. But now, in the sunlight of that garden, they let themselves feel real hope. A girl with curly hair runs by, trips near the bench, and drops a piece of cake on the grass. Without thinking, Lucas crouches to help her pick it up, and when the girl beams at him in thanks, he just says, "You're welcome," without the fear he used to have. Rodrigo sees, in this small act, a courage greater than any million-dollar investment. It's simple gestures like this, so natural and yet so rare, that give meaning to everything his money could never buy. Suddenly, someone brings out a guitar. The kid starts singing a lullaby, off-key and sweet. Rodrigo feels his eyes fill with tears but hides it by fiddling with his watch. Lucas's mother doesn't fight her emotions. She cries softly, her tear-streaked face shining with hope, tears so different from the ones before. Lucas rests his head on her shoulder and closes his eyes, letting himself have this new peace, like someone finally lays down a burden they've carried on bent shoulders for years. No one says much. There's no need. Time slows down there, each breath promising that from now on, nothing will ever be as hard as what's been left behind. Rodrigo watches his nephew and feels warmth blooming in his chest. Now he truly understands what he'd always pretended he couldn't, that family is something you can't lose, even when everything else falls apart. At that moment, a little bird lands on the branches and sings. It's just a brief sound, but Lucas breaks into a smile Rodrigo swears he's never seen before. A smile born not from having won a toy, but from having found shelter from the storm inside and out. The distant city traffic is barely a whisper. Children's laughter, the adults' shining eyes, the wind rustling the leaves, it all says that, in this small corner of the world, something new has begun. As the invisible camera pulls slowly upward, capturing the yard full of small lives starting over, you can feel the meaning of it all. Rodrigo's money has turned into a home, warmth, hope for those who once had nothing but cold. And Lucas, with his brave love, taught a millionaire how to love again. Because when it seems like all is lost, the compassion in one small gesture can change everyone's fate. Where before there was only pain, now there's a home. And no one there will ever forget.